Hello, my name's Paul Robinson. I'm a thyroid patient advocate and the author of the Recovering from Hypothyroidism series of books, which comprise of the Thyroid Patient's Manual, which is effectively book one in the series, even though it was the one I wrote last. And this is the really great general book for those people who have just found out that they may have hypothyroidism, or they found out they have, and they want to understand it very quickly, because understanding it very quickly is a means of getting well very quickly. It's also for those people who have been on treatment for a while and aren't getting well, and they don't understand why. Their doctors say they're treated, and this book covers all of that, why you might be in that situation and what all the treatments are. So it goes into T4, natural desiccated thyroid, T4, T3 and T3 treatment. It's a great book. It brings into bear all the new research and will open your eyes. Great book. This book, Recovering with T3, is what I'm most well known for. It's the first book I wrote, and I wrote it because I was on liothyronine, or T3, on its own, and I needed to understand the best way of using it. And this book is the Bible for doing that. It is a great book if you want to understand how to use T3, how to use it safely, which is the most important thing. It's a great book. And the third book in the series effectively is a CT3M handbook. CT3M stands for Circadian T3 Method. It's really only relevant if people don't get enough information from this book on using CT3M, which is my protocol for elevating cortisol levels in those people that have very low cortisol. So those are the books. I'm a thyroid patient advocate, and I help thyroid patients. I work directly with them online, but also in private consults. I think my other main role really is to communicate things, either in my books or online on my Facebook book page, which is facebook.com Recovered with T3, and on a group I run there called the Thyroid Patient's Manual. That's on Facebook as well. I communicate things via that, but also via YouTube, and I do a lot of work with YouTube now. And I like to refer to new research, but some of it is extremely complicated, so I like to try and find ways of expressing it more easily without simplifying it, not without dumbing it down, but more easily, so that thyroid patients can actually understand it. And I think I'm doing a reasonably good job of that too. And I'm going to continue to try to do that. So communication is a big theme for me. Okay, so what's this video about? Well, a long time ago, it feels like a long time because it's been a busy year. About over a year ago, I did a video YouTube blog over in my living room, and I didn't have the sound equipment now, and the video equipment I've got now, and it was about my own story. It was called Paul Robinson's Own Story, and I've had some comments on that. People loved it, but the recording was a bit quiet, and there were things that I didn't mention. So I thought at this point I would redo it. I'm going to keep the old one in place because it's had an awful lot of views, but this one will be more up to date and be more comprehensive. I hope, if I can remember everything I'm going to say. As ever, I don't use a script for these things. I made a couple of notes to start with, thinking I'll do that and do that. But that's it. I don't script them, because I tried scripting it once early on years ago, and it's like, God, I just sounded so stilted, so awful, so I just don't bother with that anymore. I just wing it, completely wing it with these videos. So this is my story, and I'll bring a whole bunch of things into it. And I have my cup of coffee here, and I'm not one of these people that forsake coffee. This is very strong black coffee. So apologies to those people that think everyone should give up coffee, but I'm not. So where do we start? Well, we start with me being a graduate from university in the UK with a university degree, good university degree in computer science. And I was always very engineering and science oriented. And I started doing physics, actually. That's where my first I went through part of a degree doing physics, and I just thought, actually, life's too short. This is too boring. I want to do all the interesting physics, how the universe was created, and all the interesting stuff like that. But no, we didn't do that. We had all sorts of boring stuff, like Van der Waals forces. I'm sorry, if you guys, any of you guys out there love Van der Waals forces, well, good luck to you. But the maths is deadly dull, especially when a lecturer stands at the front of the class with his back to you, scrolling on a board. Anyway, so I got bored with it and switched to computer science, the best thing I ever did, because it was the beginning of the computer industry. Programming language didn't exist then, and it was great. I loved it. And I ended up ultimately with a large computer manufacturing company as a software developer. But I was very good at it, and I was also very good at seeing how to organize things. So I rapidly became a manager there, and then a senior manager. And eventually I was in charge of a very, very large group of people, including electronic engineers, software engineers, all graduates, and a couple of PhDs thrown in. And doing big chunks of computer systems. And I loved doing that. I was actually very good at it. I was actually very good at communicating, strangely enough. I could tell people what the overall big picture was, and why what they were doing was so important, and why it had to be done by a certain time. And I got good results. I loved it. I loved it. Nothing short of a speeding bullet would have stopped me in those days. Nothing. If I needed to get something done, I got it done. Hell or high water, I got it done. And I did it in a way that didn't upset people. I managed to get people behind me to do it, and I just loved it. And sometimes I had a lot of work on. I would just get in the car at 4 a.m. in the morning, get into work, go past the security guys into the darkness of the company, and switch the lights on and get working, and not be home until 7 or 8 o'clock sometimes, and had boundless energy. So this is when I'm like 28, 29, and I was probably one of the youngest guys in the whole company worldwide doing what I was doing at that point. So career was just like set for me, it was great. I just loved it. And guess what happened? Yeah, you're right there as usual with me. Hypothyroidism. Hashimoto's in my case. Never heard of Hashimoto's. Didn't know much about the thyroid gland. If someone asked me a question, where's the thyroid gland, Paul? I would have said, God knows, chest? Is it in the ear? I don't know where it is. I might have had a clue because I did biology at school, but I honestly didn't know much about it. And so my GP, I had a great GP at the time, family doctor that is, in UK speak, and she did all the tests. She did a whole bunch of tests. I'm not sure what she tested. She probably tested blood count and B12 and all sorts of other stuff. But she did, strangely enough, do TSH, FT4, FT3, TPO and TG autoantibodies. Now, these days, if you can get a doctor to do that, even when you ask them, you're lucky. I mean, I was extremely lucky. She was great. And these days, the cost controls we've got in the UK would probably stop that happening. But she was fantastic. She did the test. She said, it won't find anything, Paul. Oh, by the way, at that stage, when I said I didn't feel well, and what I meant was that I'd put a lot of weight on. I was tired all the time. Good phrase, you know what that means. Tired all the time. I began to forget people's names, even in my family and at work. I forgot things. My memory was poor. Everything was a struggle. I was dragging. And so before, when I felt great and I would take anything on and feel nothing would faze me, everything fazed me. I was just struggling like crazy. And it was impacting me quite a lot at work and at home, because I had a couple of little kids by that stage. Well, one little kid and a baby. And I just didn't have the energy to do the job and the family, the father role. So yeah, the doctor ran it. She said, you've got Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Your antibodies are killing your thyroid gland. You've got almost no FT3 and almost no FT4. I didn't really know what they were, but she said they were important hormones that basically keep you alive. And she then said they uttered the famous lines. Got this little bottle of tablets here. Oh, this is going to be great. just take one of these a day to start with. It was only 25 micrograms to start with. One of these today to start with. And within no time, we'll increase it. We'll get you feeling great again. No worry. So I thought, oh, great, fantastic. The solution in a bottle. So the little tablet was, of course, levothyroxine or Synthroid or T4. And I just thought, right, I'll take it. I probably had the best week to 2 weeks, 1 to 2 weeks on any T4 medication that I ever had in the whole time I was hypothyroid. I've got a bit of a cold, so I will stop sniffing and do this. So you can tell this is a natural, non-staged video. So yeah, it's going to be like that from beginning to end. I'm sorry, you're going to have to put up with it. It's just the way it is. It's just me talking to you. Okay? So yeah, I had a good couple of weeks. I felt different. I felt energy. I felt warm. And then it wore off. And now I completely understand why that is now. And that's the relationship of TSH to conversion of T4 to T3, which you can read in the Thyroid Patient's Manual and many other places I wrote it. Often when you add T4, it converts really well to start with because your TSH is sky high. And then as the TSH comes down, it doesn't work so well. Okay, I'm not going to go into that now. It's too detailed for this one. But basically, I had 2 weeks that were great, and then she said, we just need to increase it a bit more, and I never really got back to how I felt those 2 weeks. And I'd say probably for the next year to 2 years, she fiddled around with a dose anywhere between 75 and 150 micrograms of T4, which when she said, well, this is the final treatment dose, I was left with almost all the symptoms I had to start with. Okay, I felt really ill still. I was still in work. This is 2, 3, 4 years down the road, struggling. By this time, I'd seen a professor of endocrinology, a really old guy who was very old-fashioned and basically didn't want to talk to me really much about my symptoms, just wanted to look at my laboratory test results and pronounce me cured. So that went well. That helped. Not. And I probably, around 4 to 5 years, I saw another one in the same hospital, but a much younger guy, and I was very optimistic when I saw him. I thought, he'll be more up to date. Same thing. I saw him a couple of times more. I'll talk about that in a minute. But then I started to pay for people. I saw at least 2 or 3 others that I paid to see out of my own pocket. And by this stage, I was starting to not be in work all the time. I was having time off because I felt so ill. I was not coping with work very well. I was under pressure at work because when I went back to work, originally, having had this problem, I was given more work to do than I had to start with. And they made no allowance for the fact that I wasn't feeling well. That's not good. It could argue that's partly my communication. I didn't explain it properly enough, but I didn't really understand it either. I know for a fact that they made no attempt to allow for it. So all of that was going to pot, and it was just a worry in work. I wasn't being a very good dad at home either. I was struggling. I had no patience. I was tired. And things just really got worse. I mean, I did go back to see the endocrinologist in the previous hospital, a younger guy, and I had some comments from him. I've got a number of comments. I will refer to a piece of paper because I want to quote these exactly. They're very important to quote. This is what I got a lot from people. I got from another GP. I switched GP at one point as well. Your lab tests are in range, so there's nothing wrong with your hormones. You're on the correct treatment, so your symptoms are now due to something else. Oh, God, I had that so many times. They're now due to something else. Okay, so they're exactly the same symptoms I had to start with when I had no other problem before that. And yet now the symptoms are something else, the miraculous something else. I don't know how they have the gall to say that. I mean, that's just so illogical. They're exactly the same symptoms, so some other disease just sort of snuck in there and then masqueraded with the same symptoms. I'm sorry, that someone is living in a fantasy land. It is. Oh, and the other one I got was I had the chronic fatigue syndrome diagnosis, ME. You're just going to have to learn to live with it. It's definitely chronic fatigue syndrome. I had that from an endocrinologist. Now, I asked a friend of mine recently who's very keen for me to write something about the connection between thyroid hormones and chronic fatigue syndrome and ME. And I will do that at some point. I'm not sure what form that will take. But right now I haven't got the capacity to do the proper job on it. But I will mention my connection right there in the context of this story with chronic fatigue. So I'm just going to take this piece of paper that he gave me only yesterday. And I asked him, come in, because he really knows an awful lot about chronic fatigue. So thank you to him. I asked him what the definitive diagnosis requirements are. And he said basically, the diagnosis of ME or CFS requires that the patient have the following three symptoms. Greatly lowered ability to do activities that were usual before the illness. This drop in activity level occurs along with fatigue that must last 6 months or longer. Had that one. Worsening of ME CFS symptoms after physical or mental activity what would not have caused a problem before the illness. This is known as post-exertional malaise, PEM. Had that one. Sleep problems. Well, yeah, I struggled to go to sleep at night, but then I struggled to need more sleep in the day. Now, if that doesn't count as sleep problems, I don't know what is. I mean, I was at this point of having to have 3 or 4 hours extra sleep in the day, and I wasn't sleeping well at night. My sleep was poor, and I would wake up with heart palpitations and all sorts. Then he says at least one of the two manifestations are also required. Problems with thinking and memory, cognitive impairment. I had a little of that, especially memory. Worsening of symptoms while standing or sitting upright. This is known as orthostatic intolerance. Well, standing up and passing out with low blood pressure, I think counts as that. And I passed out a lot. I remember passing out in work on a couple of occasions and waking up in a corridor with a whole lot of people around me who were really worried about me. And I passed out a lot at home, especially when my things deteriorated even further. And I would pass out, I had cuts and bruises. I'd black out completely for I don't know for how long. And this happened, I would say, 5 out of 7 days of the week with low blood pressure. My blood pressure was so low. Other common symptoms. Many but not all people with ME CFS have other symptoms. I haven't read this list before. This is me winging it. Pain is very common with ME CFS. This type of pain when it occurs and how bad it varies a lot. I didn't have muscle pain particularly. Oh, I had joint pain without swelling or redness. I had joint pain. Headaches, either new or worsening, not so much. Some people with ME CFS also have a tender lymph nodes in the neck or armpits. I had lymph nodes here, yeah. Sore throats happened often, I had that. Digestive issues, yes, God, yes. I had terrible digestive issues. Chills and sweats at night, not so much, a little bit maybe. Allergies and sensitivity to foods, yes. So basically, what should I say? Should I go back to that doctor in the hospital right now and say, oh, I'm sorry, you were right. I did have chronic fatigue syndrome. I did have ME. It went on my medical records. Were they right? No, they were not right. They were wrong. My lab tests on T4 therapy looked okay. My TSH was kind of where they would want it, just under 2 probably, 1, 2. My T4 was in range. I was on either 150 or a little bit more of T4, levothyroxine or synthroid. My FT3 was never that brilliant, funnily enough. Read the thyroid patient's manual to see what that's all about, and I'll say a bit more about it here. My FT3, which is the active hormone, T3 is the active hormone, T4 is not the active hormone, it is just a potential carrier of T3, and it's not active until it actually gets converted to T3. The great John Lowe, who did the foreword on my first book, Recovering T3, now dead unfortunately, great guy, and I wish he was here today. He could help us with a lot of issues we've got, especially in the UK. The great John Lowe, basically years ago, hang on, the laptop had just gone a bit weird. The screensaver had gone on. The great John Lowe wrote years ago about T4. He wrote, T4 is like a can of beans. That's a loose quote now. Okay, a can of beans. A can of beans is no more food than nothing until it's opened. And when it's opened, the beans come out, okay? So that's what T4 is. T4 is like a can of beans. It's no good. It's no use. It doesn't do anything until the T3 is released, until one iodine atom is removed from it by the body and releases the T3. That's what T4 is. It's a can of beans. You can't eat a can of beans. You have to take the beans out. So FT3 is the important thing. And my FT3 was always kind of, there's a range. It was somewhere middle, just below middle. And the doctor said, oh, it's normal. It's in the normal range. It's fine. They didn't know what my FT3 was before I was ill, when I was well. Okay. And we know now from research, and this is all in the Thyroid Patient's Manual, we know now that the ranges for T4 and FT3 are yay big. But we also know the individual needs, the individual personal ranges are less than half as wide as that. They're somewhere here. So you need to be in the right spot for you. If you're not in the right spot, all bets are off. You still have symptoms. I had symptoms. So basically I was given the ME/CFS diagnosis, and clearly they were right. I did conform to that. Yeah, they were right. No, they weren't. So I went away from all these endocrinologists, and basically things got worse. I bought endocrinology books, real endocrinology books the endocrinologists use when they're studying. I bought Werner Ingbar's The Thyroid. I bought Melmed's book, The Pituitary, and a whole bunch of other ones, and studied because I didn't believe them anymore. I gave up believing doctors. I really did. I was disenchanted, and I was at threat of losing my career. My illness had got so bad. And apologies, this is going to be a long video, longer than the first one, because I'm not trying to cut anything out. So I'd given up on them, and I began to realise from what I'd read that T3 is the important one, and I thought, my T3's probably shifted from when I was well to now. It's not converting as well, and it needs these D1 and D2 enzymes working properly to convert it from T4 to T3, and my FT3 is below middle, and it probably needs to be higher up. So me thinks, let me prove that. Let me go to these endocrinologists and say, can we have a trial with some T3, please? Because I think this is my problem. Oh no, you don't need T3. You're fine, you're completely well and treated now on this. You've got something else going on. Well, you've got chronic fatigue syndrome, it's in your notes. Nothing we can do. Well, I've got a group of patients on who've got chronic fatigue and ME. You can join them and they'll give you support. Basically, I was written off like so many of you are written off. And that makes me furious still today. Furious. And I'm furious that the treatment has got no better. It's got worse. It's got worse, if anything. There's so much more reluctance to prescribe any T3 now. It's just got worse. And the research is already there to show what the new paradigm of thyroid treatment ought to look like, which is symptoms-led. And it looks at FT3 and takes it into account. And a whole bunch of other things. And the new book, the Thyroid Patient's Manual book, which I'm going to grab one more time. A colleague of mine, a friend of mine, told me I should have called this the new paradigm of thyroid treatment, or at least it should have been a subtitle. It isn't that. I called it the Thyroid Patient's Manual because I wanted it to appear like a simple manual. I've written it very simply, and it says here, from hypothyroidism to good health using T4, NDT, T3, or T4, T3 thyroid treatments. So whatever works for you in the context of your symptoms and signs, and in the context of your history, your presentation, and your lab test results, and the research, the new research which shows what the new paradigm of thyroid treatment should look like. God, this is so frustrating. Not making the video, not talking to you guys, just watching these endocrinologists and doctors spin around, spinning the same old stuff and not learning anything. And this is not what I wanted to say in this video, but I'm just so cross with it all. Okay, so back to me. So what did I do? I looked at this stuff. I decided I need T3. I got no, you don't need it. No, you don't need it. No, you don't need it everywhere. And by this time, the company were thinking about medically retiring me. I got so ill. I eventually got T3 and my GP did prescribe it and I started to use it. And by this stage though, I need my glasses for this. By this stage I was really unwell. I mean, I had CFS in terms of symptoms and everything else proper by that stage. I had low blood pressure, I was passing out on most days, I'd lost weight. I'm going to give you it in stones and in pounds for those in the UK and those in America. I went from about 12 stones, which 12 and a half stones, or 76 to 80 kilograms, which is 170 pounds a plus in UK, in what the US people would speak in terms of, 170 pounds to around 110 pounds, right? Just under 8 stones or 50 kilograms. I'd lost about 35% of my body weight. Now, I'm a slim human being. Even when I was 12 stone, I'm 6'1". I'm a slim person. And I looked, God, when my mother saw me when I was at my worst, she was shocked. She went away, I think she went away thinking I was dying. And I felt like I was dying. I could have played my ribs with a xylophone thing. I mean, they were sticking out, my bones sticking out everywhere. I looked like I was anorexic. I was still trying to eat, even though my digestive symptoms wouldn't really allow me to enjoy it anymore because I had pain within half an hour of eating and for several hours afterwards. I had low cortisol as well. We could see that on a 24-hour urinary cortisol collection, which measured total cortisol and total free cortisol over 24 hours. However, I passed synactin test, an ACTH stimulation test. I basically thought I was dying. I looked like I was dying. It was awful. And I was getting close to being fired, well, not fired, but medically retired. And that ultimately happened. I lost my career. And in the process of everything going on, there was a lot of damage to relationships going on at the same time. And I'm not going to go into that too much on this. I'm not sure how much I'm ever really going to talk about that, other than use your imagination. Yeah, so eventually I got T3. I was medically retired. I was given advice on using T3, which didn't work. Eventually I reduced the T4 out, and the T3 still didn't work very well because I had low cortisol. I had to work out how to use the T3 in order to raise the cortisol at the same time, because cortisol and T3 work like this. They work as partners. You need enough cortisol here to make the T3 work. You need enough T3 here to make the cortisol work. They're partners. They're synergistic in the cells. They have to both be at a good level. And when they are, everything's good. When one of them's off, nothing's good. So I had to work that out. It took me probably a couple of years, 2.5 years to figure it out. And I did. Something clicked and I worked it out. And the protocol for doing that is it's documented in all 3 of my books, but especially in Recovering with T3, because that's the first time I wrote about it. And I've discussed it in another video in here called the Thyroid System. Okay, it's on YouTube. I've discussed it in quite a lot of detail there, so I'm not going to go into that here. When I did that, I would say at the end of 3 years, which was 10 years down the road from my first diagnosis, I started to feel well. But I'd been ill for so long, it took me a few more years to really feel good, because I just couldn't go straight to my final dose. I just still wasn't well. I'd lost lots of weight. My fitness had gone, everything. So there we are. I mean, that's what happened. I mean, it was a mess, an absolute mess. Trying to look at what else. I need to say, really. Yeah, it's a 10... Brilliant. You can tell this is a natural home environment. It's my telephone, home telephone. It'll stop in a moment. Sorry about that. So yeah, hopefully it'll stop in a moment. There we go. So yeah, that's the story. It was a bit of a nightmare, and a few years afterwards, my GP, who was a nice lady that, well, actually she was the second nice lady that treated me, she basically suggested I wrote about it, and that's when I eventually wrote Recovering with T3. I wasn't planning to write a book, and I thought, that's it, I've done it now, wrote the book, I won't do any more. And then I kind of got online helping even more patients than I had been doing to start with. And then I wrote another book and I helped even more patients, and it's just snowballed into something I never thought I'd end up doing. I thought once I wrote the first book, I just got it off my chest and that'd be it, and I could get on with my life. It's not turned out to be that way. I turned out to be a person like many other people working in this area that can't help but trying to make a difference one way or another. And I'm banging my head against a brick wall in the UK at the moment, but I am still trying to do that with the books and with communication of what's going on here and how treatment should be done. And lots of us are trying to do that. We're all trying to fight, and it's not, I know it's a worldwide problem, but there are some particular things in the UK that are very insidious at the moment. So that's it. I'm going to continue to do what I do and continue to communicate things where I think I can. I might well write about or communicate more about chronic fatigue syndrome and ME at some point, as I think a lot of the ME and chronic fatigue community don't realise that a lot of their people, not all, but a lot of people could have thyroid hormone issues that do not show up in blood tests. And so understanding the thyroid system and understanding how the active hormone is so important and why it can be failing to work properly when the blood levels actually look okay could be a big factor. So I bet even when I wrote Recovering with T3 way back in 2011, I put something in there. I actually believe then, and I believe now, that some number of chronic fatigue syndrome and ME patients have thyroid hormone imbalances at their core that could be affecting the hypothalamic pituitary axis and affecting cortisol. And I'm absolutely certain of that, some number. I think chronic fatigue syndrome doesn't have one solution, it has multiple solutions. And I think thyroid hormones could be part of it. It was for me, and I was just lucky enough to know I had a thyroid problem to start with, even though they said I didn't have one after treatment. So that's it, that's the story. It's been hell. It's been a hell of a road. I mean, I'm 61 now. Well, nearly 61 in next month. And I started this probably when I was 29. That's a long road. And I've been working on this thyroid stuff for 30 years. Hell of a long road. One I didn't expect to travel. And it's been quite painful. Some of the fallout especially has been really, really painful. Fallout that just took years and years and years and years to unravel. And that's one of the sad things about the whole thing. The damage, the collateral damage that improperly treated thyroid problems causes to individuals and their families and their surrounding life and work is huge. It's massive. Doctors are too happy to say, well, you're properly treated, levothyroxine is the right treatment, T4 is the right treatment, your labs look normal, and yet people's lives are falling apart. And yet the research is already there to show what the new paradigm of thyroid treatment should look like. I really do. I didn't do this to plug the book, but I would read that book, because that book is a simple way of describing the new paradigm of thyroid treatment, the Thyroid Patient's Manual. This is also fixable. Right, I think that's it. I don't know how long this has taken. I'm sorry if it's caused you to delay whatever you were doing. But I wanted to do a new version of it to make sure the sound was a little bit better. Okay, so that's all from me for the moment, until I rabbit on to you on another occasion. Bye for now.